Welcome back to LearnWake. This is Brandon Jed responding to felval's third backroll attempt. And this analysis video we're following up from the other two attempts that he's had. If you want to follow those videos, you can just scroll down to the bottom here, and on the left hand side you'll see some of the previous analysis videos that we have done. But you don't have to watch those in order to understand what's going on here. So alright, so let's get into this backroll. So there's two things I want to talk to you about. One, obviously, is your backroll. We're going to talk about the things that are going wrong and then ways you can fix it. But before that, I just want to hit on something that happens to most wakeboarders when they start really focusing on learning. And this is kind of something that you have to learn through trial and error and experience. I'm kind of noticing this creep into your backroll. So what it is if you try really hard and work on one specific trick for a really long time, and it's just kind of in your head, and you're trying and trying and trying and trying, what happens is you end up repeating it so many times the wrong way that incorrect way becomes a habit that is then harder to break. You can't just cognitively decide I'm going to do it different now, because that habit will just take over when the time comes. So you're starting to creep into that rut, and I just want to hopefully nip it in the bud and prevent you from falling too deep into that rut. So the way to do it is to just change up how you approach your attempts. So instead of trying it, getting up and riding for a minute to get comfortable and then trying it a bunch of times in a row until you're too tired to ride anymore, the best way, and I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're doing, but that's the most commonly done way. The best way to do it is to, get comfortable and warmed up really briefly, 1 minute, just a little 1 or 2 minute warm up, and then immediately go into some of your attempts. If they feel good, you can keep doing 3 or 4 attempts and see how they go. If they're just not feeling right and you're 2 or 3 attempts into it and it just isn't working that day, then abandon it altogether and try something completely different. Some toe side jumps, some switch jumps, some cuffed riding, do some drills, whatever, something else. But just let your mind completely take a break from it. You can even skip it for the next set or two, and then come back to it. The reason why is because if you work on that same thing again and again, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to create a bad habit. But you're also going to get mentally tired, and the more mentally tired you become, the more likely it is for habit to just take over instead. And you'll notice it. You'll feel your attempts getting closer and closer and closer to the goal trick, and if that's happening, then keep going with it for 4 or 5 attempts. But then you'll get to a point where you'll feel that it is getting further and further and further away from the correct position, and as soon as you start to feel that happening, you're better off just abandoning it than trying to fight through it, because when you try and fight through it, you do more harm than good. So that being said, I just want to make sure you're not, running into that issue. I've gone through that whole thing with way too many tricks. One of those things that I wish I had known before. So now whenever I try a trick, that's kind of the way I approach it. Is if it's getting in my head or whatever, I just kind of take a break and move on to something else, and you end up learning the fastest that way. So alright, so let's move on to this backroll in particular. So the first thing that I noticed is you're edging out really far, too far in fact. You edge all the way out of the screen, all the way out of the frame here. And then when you come back in, I do like that you're nice and mellow, but right about here you start to get on your edge pretty quick, which leaves a lot of margin for error and a really long time to hold that edge without coming off of edge at the end. So I want to compare this distance from the wake to this correct version that I've introduced you to before with Kyle. And if you look at his path here, you'll see it's all captured in this frame, and we're even zoomed in pretty far. I mean, that's not very far away from the wakes, but Kyle is able to make it look really easy. So I want you to take this approach. Right now you're edging out about 3 times as far. So Kyle goes out to about here. You're back in, a third of the way here, and then you even edged out of frame to begin with. So I don't even want you going out to here. I want you going out to here like Kyle does. And that is going to prevent some of the issues in the air that we're going to head to next. So your second attempt was actually more like right here is where you started. And your first attempt was really wide, and then now you're back to wide again. So I know it feels comfortable and it gives you the confidence that you're going to make it across with speed and everything, but your back roll is good enough you can still go wake to wake with just this much of an approach. So I would alter that, and it's going to allow you, even though it feels kind of scary like you're not going to make it, that will allow you and kind of force you to edge properly into the wake. So that's one thing as far as the setup. The rest of the setup looks pretty decent. The next part is the direction of rotation. Let me slow this guy down a little bit so that we can make sure we get it. So during this, if you watch closely, it's hard to see because you're kind of far away, but you start to bring your upper body toward the boat really aggressively, and you flip kind of forward really hard. You can see it right here where your upper body is covering your board for the most part, and you're really just diving forward right there. And then you come out of it by looking over your lead shoulder, and it sort of corrects itself. And by doing so, stalls you out a little bit because you have to twist back to your original position, and then you get kind of hung up. So you are really close. That approach is one half of it. The other half is you're flipping at the boat really hard, which is kind of a Mexican back roll sort of a flipping rotation, but instead of flipping toward rail over rail like a barrel roll style, front flip style barrel roll, you're flipping at the boat really hard, and you're getting really close. Had you not been spotting the water so early, you'd be getting really close to having the heel side edge of your board run into the rope again. So I want to take you to this Mexican hillside back roll troubleshooting video, and this will show you what a Mexican back roll is if you're not familiar, and then the flipping direction that you're currently doing is the wrong one in this. Obviously the goal trick is not to do a Mexican back roll, it's to do a progressive one. But you'll see some similarities in yours. Yours is kind of halfway between. So if you watch Amber here, you'll see she uses her upper body and kind of tucks it forward toward the boat, and then she gets kind of hung up, and you'll see the rope hits her heel side edge of the board and kind of chops the rope, and she falls back very similar to yours. So what I want you to do is just be aware that you are flipping that way, and instead we want to try and load it up more, and you want to go more cartwheel with your upper body and your board sort of rotating in this pinwheel direction instead of rolling forward as much. And right now it's kind of weird because you're halfway between this one and the one that Amber demonstrated where she chopped the rope. So it's really just an upper body flipping direction. So if we can correct that, it might be, I can't really see very close on that video. I can't tell exactly where your eyes are, but pay attention to where Kyle is looking through this. He's facing the boat, and then he allows his chin to kind of go toward his lead shoulder to look through the flip and then spot the water nice and early, and then gets that line tension to catch up with him again. It's just early in the beginning. You finish like this, but you start like in the Mexican hillside back roll. You start at Mexican and finish it progressive. So your beginning looks a lot like that. And then you correct it pretty good and finish it like the hillside back roll in the progressive way. But the problem is that initial takeoff, messes with your line tension. So you'll watch how she kind of dives toward the boat, and when that happens, her line tension gets funky in the middle. It doesn't get very tight, and then it kind of yanks her board here in the middle, and then she has nothing to hold on to at the end. So that's about it. Again, the fixes are just paying attention to what you're doing with your eyes, where they're looking. You should really look almost over your lead shoulder at the beginning as soon as you leave the wake, and stay nice and tall, and you'll flip cartwheel style, tip over tail instead of forward rail over rail, if that makes sense. So your board is going to loop out in this fashion instead of having you turn sideways and go rail over rail. Hopefully that makes sense. We're getting real technical here, but that's the habit you're falling into. So I think if you shorten that approach up, it'll make it way easier to flip the correct direction, and then keep an eye on where you're looking throughout the flip, and that's going to help a lot. One last suggestion I'll make is to do some heel side, front side shifties. Just edge into the wake like you normally would do a wake jump. Do a wake jump, but in the air, keep two hands on the handle, and then shifty the board front side like you're going to do a heel side, front side 180, and then return back to your normal heel side riding position. What that's going to do is that's going to mimic the landing. So in case you get turned front side, you know how to fix the landing. So I would make sure that you are practicing that so that becomes a habit. So when you're upside down in the air and you spot the landing, your body just can naturally do it instead of you having to think through that part. So that'll be a big help. And that's about it. So good luck. Let us know if you have any other questions. And again, you can upload another video if we're continuing to have problems, or you can post a video of you landing this in the forums. Either way, we'll see you around the site.